Jack Whitley from JCAD Pictures, and I'm answering the evaluation question: in what ways does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms of conventions of real media products? So our thriller film is mostly similar to other thriller films and uses typical thriller conventions that most other thriller films do use themselves, which is how we got our inspiration. So the first convention I'll talk about is music. And when it came to music, we decided to have a fast-paced, tense music, which is seen in many thriller films, such as music from Batman The Dark Knight Rises, as it adds to the chase scene and makes it seem more interesting for the audience and intense while they're watching it, and it will keep them interested.
Hello. Stay level.
We also got this from the movie director Hitchcock, as he does a lot of suspenseful films in which he uses intense music to build up a scene. So, because of this, we decided to use parallel music like many other movies, as it will add to the chase scene with what happens on screen and make the audience feel more tense because of the music, because the music sounds really uneasy, so the audience will know something is wrong. And we decided to have our main antagonist not say a word, because it adds to that fear factor that he has. Sometimes when an antagonist does not say anything, it actually creates more suspense and makes it more frightening than when they do say something, because it's so out of the ordinary. And when you genuinely talk to someone, they answer back, or they would say something to you, but the fact that he doesn't say anything and just watches creates that tension and so not having any sound or music on his part helps, because it brings his character more intense and fearful. So obviously this is not really a typical convention, because many films don't use this. They do have their antagonist rather saying a long speech before they kill the protagonist, or like have something to do with the protagonist, rather than just follow. However, we also did go against typical films as well as this to change, because we changed the tempo of the music. So when it cuts to the flashback scene, the mood of the film changes from intense to a quiet, ordinary evening. So this gave us, the audience, a chance to figure out a bit more about the characters themselves. So we wanted them to feel at ease when they're at this house. So that's why when Jason faints and has the flashback, the music suddenly cuts from this intense thumping to a peaceful piano, quite acoustic guitar sound. So this is going to make the audience feel like welcomed into the home of Jason and Katie, and make them feel a little bit more at ease. Whereas towards the end of that scene, just before you see the mysterious biker, the music picks back up again. That's how the audience will know something else is not right, and then when you see the mysterious biker, they'll realise. And that's not used in many typical thriller films. Thriller films usually generally just go for the intense, fast-paced action, though it is kind of typical because in some cases, mainly used in horror films, but I know in the film Taken, when Brian Mills is running away from someone, or he is chasing someone, and suddenly the person he's chasing disappears, the music will go quiet and maybe like an eerie squeak. And then when the person reappears, there'll be a thump, and that intense music will be back. So this is where we got the inspiration for our music.
You alright, hon?
How was your day?
Same old. Usual.
Next convention I want to talk about, which is probably one of the main ones, is the characters in our thriller film. So our main antagonist is a typical villain. He's a big guy, visually frightening, because of his size and his costume he is wearing. And also the fact that he does not say anything and just follows, as I mentioned with the music and sound, actually creates more suspense for his character. It brings the tension because he doesn't say anything. The audience know he's not right and he's bad because it's so out of the ordinary, and the fact that he doesn't say anything makes the scene visually uneasy to watch. Is really going to create that kind of tension with his character. However, it is not like other thriller films, as usually the antagonist speaks to assert their dominance, but our villain does not do this and only follows. The wife Katie in the film is a typical thriller film damsel in distress, as she gets taken and Jason, her husband, has to go and save her, which is much like the film Taken when Brian Mills' daughter gets taken away from him. However, the character is stronger than she looks, and she's well paid and has a good life. Though she does rely on Jason, as we see in the opening 2 minutes when the thump on the door, she does rely on him to keep her safe. The fact that she's kind of like strong, she can fend for herself, does kind of push against typical damsels in distress, as they're usually can't really do anything for themselves. They know they're trapped, they're in prison, they're behind bars, and it's completely relies on the protagonist to save them. Whereas in our thriller film, in the opening 2 minutes, you can see the fact that she's making dinner, the way she's dressed, the way she handles things. She is more defending herself. She can defend herself, though we didn't want her to be, if she could defend herself, she wouldn't get into the situation that she does later on in the film, which is why we show the weakness of when the thump on the door happens, she freaks out and has to ask Jason what's the matter. But then straight after that, even though where the sound just came from, she does rely on Jason that he's keeping her safe, and she does go upstairs even though something obviously has gone wrong. So she does trust Jason, which kind of gives us that foolishness of her character. Finally, our protagonist Jason is much like a typical character when it comes to his courage and his gun handling skills. And when it comes to enemies, he knows how to handle himself, he knows how to shoot a gun. It's in every thriller film, the main protagonist, whether it be Clarice in Silence of the Lambs, Brian Mills from Taken, they all know how to handle a weapon. Sherlock Holmes, most protagonists, you don't really have to see them learning the skills, they generally already have them. And we didn't want to just say that Jason's an ordinary character off the street, that he suddenly knows how to use a weapon. But he is working for the secret government, and his job does revolve around this kind of stuff. Therefore, he is going to know how to use a weapon from his day job. However, he does not look like a typical thriller film hero, as he is he's not very strong, and he wears glasses, which, with the rest of his appearance, makes him look like a bit of a geek. The fact that he wears glasses, he hasn't got the biggest physique. He's quite scrawny in a way. He doesn't have many muscles. It kind of gives the sense that he's just an ordinary man, just as the people sitting in the audience. So this is also like in the film Silence of the Lambs, as the protagonist Clarice is an ordinary woman. She looks small and weak, but actually she's an underdog and has great courage, which the audience can relate to. However, we did this so that the audience could relate to the protagonist, as he is just an ordinary guy. So they can also feel more involved in the film, as his courage will spray onto them, and maybe it will encourage them to do something in their life, which involves courage, because they can relate to him because he is just a normal guy on the screen, and rather than being this big jacked up the guy, people aren't striving to be him, they can just relate to him. The next convention I'm talking about is location, which is also going to be split into setting as well. So the location of our film, we wanted to be for the chase scene. We wanted to be an isolated location where it made the protagonist seem a bit more vulnerable because he's alone, which adds to the tension of the chase and keep the viewers hooked. That is why we decided to use Bluebell Forest. It's more of a wood than a forest because it's very small. It's a dark location, it's mysterious, and it adds tension for when he runs out, and there's a very one-way road. So it's very narrow, there's not really many places to go. It's rather run back into the wood where he was running from, and he knows he's running from something in there. He rather turns right, which heads straight towards a mysterious biker, or he can turn left and run down that road, which is why we chose this location. It's very discreet, it was easy to film there because it wasn't private, it's for anyone to go there, but it's quite quiet. The wood is very small itself, but because we didn't need to use much of it, it wasn't really a problem for filming. And the main thing was we wanted this to be an intense chase scene. We didn't want any plot holes where he could have run over the field, but that's going to slow him down. There is cars around, but you're not just going to smash into someone's car. But the way that he has to run down that road, it's either keep running or try and hide. And in the end, he does try and hide. Because of this location, it allowed us to do this. The remoteness of the area is used in many thriller films as it brings tension to a scene. Much like in the film Misery, Annie Wilkes' house in the middle of nowhere, and is far from civilization, just like our Wood and our thriller film.
almost died.
So the fact that
compound fracture of the tibia in
Annie
both
Wilkes' house
legs
is so
and the
far out of the way,
fibula in the right leg is
it gives the
fractured
sense that
too.
Paul Sheldon
And as soon as the road's
he
open,
can't do anything,
I'll
he's
take you to a
helpless.
hospital.
And that's how we wanted the protagonist to
Meantime,
seem. We
you've
want
got a
our
lot of
protagonist to
recovering
be
to
the
do.
underdog.
There is
He already has the
nothing to
physique
worry
of being an
about.
underdog, so
You're
he
gonna
needs the
be just
location
fine.
and the
your
storyline
number
to
one
work with
fan.
that, so that
My
in
name
the
is
end,
Annie Wilkes.
the
I
viewers
think one
will
of
be
my
rooting for him.
clients, Paul Sheldon, might
The
be in-
flashback scene when Jason comes back to the house is an ordinary, typical location to have dinner.
You alright,
We
man?
used my family
How's
member's
your
house
day?
to film. They didn't have the biggest house. It's just an ordinary sized house, but we wanted to give the stance that Jason and Katie have a fairly
What
big
was that?
house to show that their life is going well.
I didn't hear
To
anything.
do this, we only
Maybe
use the
just quiet.
kitchen.
Look,
It's just
I'll
an
be up in a
ordinary
minute, okay?
kitchen.
I'll meet you up there.
Because you don't see the other side of the house, but you see the way they're dressed, you just assume that they've got a fairly big house. It has the upstairs, and you can see Katie going upstairs, which already conveys it's a fairly big house. Maybe not massive, but because we kept the filming in the flashback scene to a very minimal, just in the kitchen, it gives the sense, there's a few doors that you see, there's about 3 doors you see in that one scene, so it does convey that it is a big house. So this isn't, this is not using many typical thriller films. If you see a thriller film such as Marine 4, the protagonist in that usually lives like in an apartment or something, maybe a small apartment. That is the same in Taken as well. But we wanted to go all out to show where their life is now, and then everything goes wrong, and they see how much Jason and Katie are losing from this whole horrible experience. So that leads me straight on to talk about the setting of the film. So the location, I talked about where we actually filmed it. The setting is what it's supposed to be. So when it came to the setting, we wanted to set it in like a place like Slovakia. As this is where Katie is taken to when she is kept by the terrorists. She's out doing a report in there. That's when she gets taken, but also you don't see that in the opening 2 minutes. So this creates a sense of danger, as Jason and Katie are in different setting in which they were used to. So it's full of dangerous enemies. This also makes them have a goal throughout the film, which is getting back home. However, the flashback scene when Jason and Katie are at home, this is set in typical England Essex house, which is where the location of it was where we filmed. It's an already set in ordinary people who the audience can relate to. As I said, they have a big house and a lot of money. But as the house scene where we're just in the kitchen, we didn't have to show all that, but it's conveying that they live in a big mansion in Essex. You never see outside, you only ever see the kitchen, so you never have, when filming we never had to worry. It's only the kitchen, but because of the way they dress, maybe not the food they eat, because he was late home, they only had soup, it was a quick dinner. But you can see the glasses they have, the cooker they have, it's all very high class, so therefore it's going to convey that they live in a bigger house than what they actually do. So this is like in the film Taken, as Brian Mills has a nice house with his wife in a secure location until everything goes wrong, and she gets taken in Paris. So Brian Mills has to fly out to France and Paris. He's in a different location. He knows he's against dangerous enemies, and he's already been put at a disadvantage, much like our character, which gives them something to work up towards and something to fight against it, giving them that underdog character feel because of the difficult location they're in. The next convention to talk about is the camera shots we decided to use. We decided to use camera shots that we liked from our research stage, our preliminary task, and ones that made the scenes come together. And most of our camera shots came from the inspiration we got from other films. We watched a lot of films in preparation to make the preliminary task, so a lot of the camera shots we got came from those types of films. This is why we use typical point of view shot in the chase scene, because it creates tension for the audience, as they do not know what's coming and will find out with the character. So when Jason goes round the corner, they don't know what's on the other side until he goes round it himself. We also used a point of view shot to get the audience more involved with the film, as they thought that they were a part of the film, which they which made them move with the characters so they feel more involved. They're much like in the film Jaws, though obviously our protagonist wasn't a shark. The point of view shot when Jaws is like swimming out to see them to kill someone, the audience don't know necessarily what's going on. They've got this point of view shot underwater, so they don't know what's going to happen until it actually happens. But then you get a glimpse of what's going to happen. So it's much like when Jason runs out, he looks to the left, he sees the bike, so you know someone's there with him. Just like when the point of view shot, Jaws sees the legs, the viewers know what's going to happen. So when Jaws goes to attack, they know it's happening. When Jason turns to the right, they know that there's going to be someone standing there. We did take inspiration for a tracking shot from Silence of the Lambs, but we also decided to cut it out of the final film, as the shot itself was too shaky and looked very unprofessional. However, we also went against the typical thriller film camera shots and added in a unique sped up zoom shot. I wanted to add this myself as it portrayed how he recognised the character but couldn't remember him at the same time, but the way that it zooms in, the audience know he has some relation to this character, but obviously the way he's fainting, he knows he's trying to think about it, and that's when the flashback occurs. The zoom in shot also represents his mind zooming in on the guy's face when he saw him to convey that this was the guy before he lost his memory. So again, the way it zooms in, the audience is going to know this character has some sort of relation to Jason, but because the protagonist Jason is kind of fading out, they know that he can't remember. We wanted to make sure that Jason, in the opening 2 minutes, you could have the chase scene, but also have the audience know early on that Jason has a family he has to provide for, his wife and the future daughter or son that they might have. So by having a reason for him to have this flashback and remember this character, it's slowly going to build the parts together for him to get back to his wife, and give him the motivation throughout the film to save his wife and save his future child. Next, I will talk about mise-en-scène in our and the costume and the props we used, and a little bit about the location, but not too much because obviously I've already discussed that in our opening 2 minutes. So we wanted to use the location props and costume that were realistic, so the audience would feel that this could happen in real life, and they could relate to the characters in the film. We used a typical BB gun, but it was a metal one, so it looked real and it was pretty heavy when you used it. So it gave the effect of if Joe, the actor who played Jason, was actually holding a gun. So the way he would have been the same movements if he had a real gun. Obviously, we wouldn't have used a real gun because in this country they're illegal, and we didn't want to harm anyone on set, obviously. We also used soup as the meal for Jason when he got home, as this conveyed he was late home, which conveyed that things were already starting to deteriorate at home. We did discuss having like a big roast dinner, but obviously when it came to like time management, we had to refilm the whole to open in 2 minutes again, because we weren't happy with how it went the first time. So obviously we had we didn't want to waste an extraordinary amount of money buying beef, chicken, roast chicken, potatoes and that. So instead we started to go quick with soup, but which actually worked well because we wanted to show that things were going downhill at home straight off the bat, and obviously this allowed us to do that. The costume they were wearing in the film portrayed the status in the streets. They dressed very formal and casual, formal and powerful, to show that they were in control of their lives. But this contrast to Jason's costume in the chase scene, as in the chase scene the costume is all ripped, which again shows that something has happened, his life is deteriorating from what it used to be. Suits are mostly typical for an antagonist in a thriller film, as it shows they have authority over the protagonist, making the hero look like an underdog when he saves the day. This is slightly why we went for the antagonist to be wearing a suit. We decided to have him wearing a suit because we wanted to show the connection between him and Jason, as they used to work together, as you find out later in the film. The fact that they both wear suits is quite typical for a thriller film, as you've ever seen the film Focus. Will Smith's character in that film wears a very fashionable suit, and the fact that we know the fashionable suit, he has a lot of money, which he gambles like 100,000 on a football game, which is very silly, but because he has this suit, we know that he has a lot of money, and that's a similar reason why we went for this with Jason. But also, obviously, because the contrast between that and his chase scene is quite significant. Finally, I'm going to talk about the storyline in our thriller film. The storyline in our thriller film is like many other thriller films, but it has a twist. It has a protagonist, an antagonist, and a damsel in distress. The storyline follows the protagonist, Jason, as he has lost his memory and is being chased by a mysterious man in a helmet. He's trying to figure out what happened to him and about his past life. When he sees the mysterious biker, it triggers a flashback to show him and his wife. This gives him the motivation to keep running and to find out what is going on. So this is like many other thriller films which follow the same structure, like the film Taken, which has the protagonist chasing after the antagonist trying to save the damsel in distress. It's a very similar storyline to what we have going on. This is slightly, and I mean very slightly, like the Goffman's character theory. And basically what this theory is, looked up on the internet, is basically he thinks that all thriller films, all films in general, have a protagonist, which is the leading character, the dean antagonist, which is the secondary character, which ours doesn't quite have. You could say that that's the damsel in distress, or you could say it's the antagonist, because obviously these two used to be partners. The bit player, the minor character whose specific backgrounds the audience is not aware of, that could also be the antagonist because he is very mysterious. No one knows what his background. He also thinks there should be the fool, which is a character that uses humour to convey a message. I don't completely agree with that, because lots of thriller films don't really have someone that conveys messages with humour. A lot of films do have humour in them, but I wouldn't say they have a specific character to go for them. But that's why I said it's slightly based on this theory. Though our film does not follow all these characters, it does have some. So overall, our storyline does go in depth with our main characters and takes similarities from the film Memento, because Jason loses memory and gets the flashback throughout the film. So much like in Memento, Jason loses memory. They have flashbacks throughout the film, which helps them get closer and closer to what they're trying to find out. In our thriller film, it's Jason trying to get back to his wife and save her. So the storyline does follow a similar structure to most other films. It has, even in the opening 2 minutes, it has the first act, what's going on, the second act, I remember, the third act, find out what's going on. So the film does kind of have this structure to it, even the opening 2 minutes, which is what we wanted to keep. Most films have 3 acts, our opening 2 minutes have 3 acts, so overall the film is going to be, the opening 2 minutes is easy to follow for the audience. It gives them a break from the chase scene so it's not continuous boredom. And hopefully it makes the audience want to find out what's actually going on with this character. Why is the mysterious biker following Jason? What does he have to do with the connection with Jason? And will Jason save his wife? Where is she in the present day? So that is my evaluation answer for question 1. It's the thriller film itself, the opening 2 minutes, did go fairly well. We're happy with it, and we felt that the conventions we followed support the film very well, and it's also so we use some of our own ideas that we thought of, but we also got much inspiration from our favourite thriller films of all time.